welcome to Broken Entertainment. Let's go ahead and get into this article and we'll kind of pick up from there. Um, this is on Bounding into Comics. The Tolkien Society announces Tolkien and Diversity theme for summer seminar. Yippee. The Tolkien Society, the famous educational charity, literary society, and international fan club devoted to promoting the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Not anymore. Has announced that the theme of their second annual summer seminar will be Tolkien and diversity. Before I get farther into this all sounds very innocent. We're going to talk about the diversity in Tolkien's works and how diversity works in the world of Tolkien and so on and so forth. But Tolkien has long been a target of the people who believe that our fantasy myths and fantasy stories are inherently exclusive and inherently racist. But he's been protected by his son up until the point of his death. And he always kept a tight rein on the IP and where it went. The problem is that diversity is never used in a good way anymore. Diversity is used as a club. It's used to try to break things down, try to deconstruct things, and try to replace them. It's why you get race-swapped characters. It's why you get reimaginings. It's why you get all this crap that's going on right now. It's why you get John Connor killed and replaced with a Latina woman. Okay? Diversity is nice on the surface. We all like the idea. We all like the idea presented in a world of everybody's included, everybody's represented. We like that concept. But that's why it's used, because it's easy for us to see on the surface and go, "Ooh, that's I like that idea. I like the idea of more women in the workplace. I like the idea of more minority characters. I like the idea of, this and that." But that's what they do. They take something that sounds simple and they twist it and they manipulate it and they use it to break things down. Because you can't replace something if it's strong. And we've seen that in the comic book industry. We've seen that everywhere. Movies, television, you name it. Men are routinely shit on now. It started in commercials, then it was ha-ha funny, and then it just expanded until now women are really the ones in charge in all the TV shows, and the men are the incompetent boobs in the background, if they're not outright misogynist. And the problem is that's not diversity. Diversity is not putting one group of people down to raise another group of people up. Diversity is raising everybody up. Diversity is telling a story and not excluding people. Diversity is, I'm going to have this character and they happen to be black. The diversity that they're talking about is, I'm going to have this character, they are black. There's a difference. I'm going to have this character, they are black, means that the sole definition of this person is their blackness. Whereas I'm going to have this character, they happen to be black, is I'm going to make this character, they're really awesome, they do this and this, they're good at this, they're bad at this, and they also have to be black. That informs their life. It informs their creation as a character. It informs how they respond to things. But it is not their definition. And that's what this kind of diversity is. It's defining people by surface level traits. Because the intent is division, deconstruction, and replacing. And unfortunately, that's where we are with a lot of our entertainment right now. And it's not a white person thing. It's everybody. It's bad for everybody because you're not given good minority characters. You're given shit. Or you're given, we're going to turn Superman black. We're not going to give you Jon Stewart, who is a black character who's very awesome. That's too much work. We're going to give you scraps. And we're going to give you, when we don't give you scraps, when we do make a new character, the only thing about them is their skin color. Or their sexual identity, or their gender, or who they sleep with, or whatever. That's their only defining feature. And for a lot of people, those things are very important parts of their lives. That's absolutely true, but it's never the only thing. It informs your life. It does not dictate your life. And they push shows. They push certain things. Okay? They push The Boys. They push things that deconstruct what we had and what we looked up to. And they replace them with something else. And if you get upset, if you get mad, they just call you names. But then they'll turn around and they'll say, oh, this is about diversity. It's not about diversity. It's about control. It's about breaking down rather than building up. You know, the great thing about Superman, who was created in the 1930s, was that he was a hero for everyone. That was his purpose. He was every man's hero. He fought the big guy for the little guy. You know, he was informed by the Depression. He came out of this awful situation of the Depression, and he stood for hope and justice for everybody. And now, we're not allowed to have that. And it started in small increments. It started actually way back in Superman Returns. Superman's motto for a long time was truth, justice, and the American way. In Superman Returns, it was referenced one time, truth, justice, and all that stuff. It was a throwaway line, everybody said, eh. You know, for a long time, when I criticized that stuff, people would tell me, oh, you're just picking at it. Well, it all starts small. And this is the beginning of the end of Tolkien. It starts small. And people are going to misconstrue, and they're going to say, well, you just don't like XYZ in your fantasy. Well, I do, actually. I read a lot of books that have these minority characters in them, and I write books with minority characters in them because that's the way the world is. But Tolkien was writing in a specific world that was based on Northern and Central Europe, which at the time was mostly white. So his human characters are white. His elves are also white, but that's because elves have always been portrayed to that point as very fair-skinned. And this is a man that went into the heart of World War I and came out and wrote about hope he lived through the Great Depression as well. And they're going to say, well, and this is where this is going, he's racist. And that allows them to drive a wedge into Tolkien. And it allows them to deconstruct it and rebuild it in the image they want. And you're going to, not everyone, but these people would say, well, we're just trying to make it diverse for the modern audience. You know, if I believed that you were doing it out of some sort of honesty, I wouldn't have as much of a problem. If I was watching Lord of the Rings one day, the Lord of the Rings TV show, for example, and there was a black character, I wouldn't think anything of it. We know there are actually places in Tolkien's world that do have minorities. So it could be someone from there. And in fact, that would be a great story, wouldn't it? To have a character who has traveled from another place and come to Middle-earth. But what they're going to do is they're not going to make a character who is that. They're going to make a character who sole defining feature is their race. And they're going to make it a thing. Okay? It's not going to be an allegory. It's just going to be straight up in your face a thing. And you don't like me because of this color. Well, yeah. That's what they're going to do. And it always starts with these small little things of, okay, well, we're going to present it in this way. And average people are going to go, yeah, what's the problem with having a black guy in Tolkien? Well, there isn't one. The problem is the way it's done. And the reason it's done. The problem is that it's going to be done to unmake something. It's going to be done, and they're not going to say, this character happens to be black. They're going to say, or, pick your minority. They're going to say, this character is that, and anybody who responds negatively to them will either be a villain or somebody they intend to deconstruct. But it's important to understand this will start small. This is going to start here with the Tolkien Society. Because they want to make those arguments. And then they want to get them out there so that people are like, oh yeah, well, think about the average person. How much do they know about Tolkien? How much do they know about his world? Not a whole lot. And then you're going to have these academics come out and say, Tolkien had problems with race. And they're going to go, well, yeah, he was from like the 1920s or something, so yeah, probably. See, it's an easy argument. If you don't know a lot about the topic, it's an easy argument. You just say, you had a problem with race. And people are, oh, yeah, okay. And once you do that, then you can start saying, well, we're going to fix it. You see. Then you deconstruct. All new, all different Tolkien. And the problem here is that nothing happens in a vacuum. And people might say, well, okay, so what if they put minorities in Tolkien? Is that your problem that you don't want minorities in Tolkien? No, I have no problem with that because, as I said, they are in that world. They're not featured heavily, but they're there. And it would be a really interesting story to have someone move from one of those lands to Middle Earth. Okay? That would be great. But instead, what you're going to do is you're going to take something that's already been done. Elves. And you're going to say, well, elves need to have different genders. They need to have different sexualities. They need to have people of different skin color. All of which directly defies how elves are laid out in Tolkien. Elves don't have different skin colors because they're not human. And they all come from generally the same place. You know, the thing about our world now is that nobody comes from generally the same place, right? We're all spread out all over the place. And it can be hard to picture a world that isn't like that. But the ancient world was very much like that. You know, Native Americans hadn't seen people of other skin colors until the colonists arrived. And although there was trading between and some movement between Europe and China and Africa for a long time, it was never really blended like it is today. So it's easy for us to not understand how a world could be like that and to point at it and go, that's racism. Well, no, it's not. It's Tolkien built his world the way his world existed at the time and the way ancient worlds worked. There were other places with other skin tones, but those places weren't what he was writing about. But he did talk about them, and he did include them, and you have an army of them show up on Sauron's side near the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and, you know, people, of course, will say, well, that's racist, because he was using them as evil. Well, no, they were mercenaries, and Sauron hired them, and they probably didn't understand exactly what was going on, because they're outsiders, they're mercenaries, they're not from this area, they haven't dealt with Sauron. But none of that really matters, because you can have people who are minorities and are villains without saying the whole race is a villain. You know, this whole argument of orcs are racist because they represent black people in fantasy. Well, they don't. They represent orcs. And Tolkien was writing based on mythologies and fairy tales from long before his time. He wasn't writing orcs as a racial stand-in. He was writing orcs as orcs. He was so protective of these mythologies and traditions and very careful in how he wrote them, that when Walt Disney produced Snow White, he thought it was garbage. And he thought it was garbage because of the way the dwarves were perceived and shown. Because it wasn't serious and didn't pay respect to the fairy tale traditions of dwarves. To call this guy a racist is absurd, but that's exactly where they're going. A lot of our modern fantasy stories, and I'm gonna point to Brandon Sanderson here for a minute, take into account a world that is very mixed, because that's what we live in. So that's what we write, typically. And in some level, we're afraid not to. Because how dare you write a story that doesn't include these people? Now, my story is very mixed as well. And there's a reason for that in the setting. Because there was this massive continent-spanning, dominating empire that brought in people from all over the place. And when it breaks apart, these people kind of retreat to their own camps. But in Tolkien's world, in Middle Earth, it was based more around ancient Earth, which, yes, was somewhat blended, but compared to today, was not at all. And we keep going back and applying today to the past. But you can't apply today to the past because today is today. Today is informed by everything going on in our world now. But let's go ahead and get into this. The Tolkien Society explained that they had been spurred by recent interpretations of Tolkien's works and a cast list of the upcoming Amazon show The Lord of the Rings to choose the name of Tolkien and diversity. As they believed it to be crucial, we discussed the theme of diversity in relation to Tolkien. I was a trained academic. I was trained in history. I have a master's degree in history. I almost went for a doctorate and ended up choosing not to. But here's the thing. This is how academics attack stuff. It sounds very innocent, right? Oh, we just want to talk about it. Well, they never talk about it. They deconstruct it because they're all on the same side. Especially historians. Historians have disagreements on some things, but most of the people who will be writing for a conference like this come from one camp. And they're Marxist historians. And I don't say that as a derogatory. That's what they call themselves. They're Marxist historians because their historical approach approaches things through economics and class and from the bottom to the top rather than top to the bottom. So instead of talking about George Washington, you talk about his soldiers. And they're all going to come to very similar conclusions. This kind of call for papers is a call for a specific direction. Because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be so pointed about it. But these people are going to come in. They're going to come in from very specific directions, very specific viewpoints, and they're going to drive a wedge into Tolkien. It's the groundwork. The next step is the TV show, by the way. How do adaptations of Tolkien works from film and art to music open a discourse on the diversity within Tolkien's works and his place within modern society? Tolkien didn't exist in modern society. The Tolkien Society continued, beyond his secondary world, diversity further encompasses Tolkien's readership and how his text exists within the primary world. The Tolkien Society further asked, who is reading Tolkien? How is he understood around the globe? How many of these new readings enrich current perspectives? Who is reading Tolkien? So there's going to be two directions this takes. The first one is white gatekeepers read Tolkien, but secretly a lot of minorities read Tolkien. And the other direction is we need to open this up to more minorities. So what they're going to do is they're going to say gatekeepers are being racist. And then they're going to shut out the stories of people who read Tolkien but don't match the skin colors they're looking for. And then they're going to bring in those other opinions. And there's nothing at all wrong with those other opinions. There are a lot of people who read Tolkien of every race, of every nationality, of every gender, and every identity. And they all have stories about how Tolkien has affected their lives. And that's great. And we should hear all of them. The more people we can hear, the better. Because the more ideas we hear, the better everything becomes. But the problem here is that it's going to shut out one side. And it's going to keep shutting out one side. And we've already seen this happen everywhere else. This isn't your story anymore. Stay back in the corner. Brie Larson, I don't need a bunch of white people telling me what they thought about this movie. They've done this everywhere else. Now it's going to happen to Tolkien. And again, everybody should be welcome to read Tolkien. Everybody is welcome to read Tolkien. And I would love to hear from people who are a minority or who are from somewhere you might not expect reading Tolkien. I want to hear their stories and their interpretations. That's what this should be calling for. It shouldn't be diversity in Tolkien. It shouldn't be academic papers. It should be, we would like to hear from everybody who reads Tolkien and hear your personal story and why Tolkien matters to you. And then you can highlight those you might not expect. But then you still get everybody. Representation is now more important than ever. And Tolkien's efforts to represent or ignore, here it is. Right here, black and white, clear as day. That's the attack signal. Particular characteristics requires further examination. Additionally, how a character's identity shapes and influences its places within Tolkien's secondary world still requires greater attention. Let us be clear. Tolkien was not writing about identity. Tolkien wrote a children's story called The Hobbit. And then he wanted to expand on that world, and he wanted to tell more stories. And he had this idea of Sauron. And of a world kind of put through hell. Because that's what he just went through. And he wasn't talking about race. And he wasn't thinking about race. And he wasn't talking about class. And he wasn't talking about sexual identity or orientation. And he wasn't talking about these things. Because he was talking about something much more important. Hope. He was talking to a world that had just come out of one of the worst periods in modern history. And he was saying, look, there's light. And in specifics, Tolkien was talking about the light of hope and the light of God, because Tolkien is a very religious man. And he was saying, look, things can be dark, but they get better. Tolkien was not writing about this crap. You're going back with our understanding of the world, and you're applying it to a man writing in a completely different time. And you're doing it because you want to break it down, because you want to destroy Tolkien and replace it with something else. Because the people who call themselves social justice warriors want to drive a wedge into society. Everybody has to be defined by their class and their race and their identity. And Tolkien doesn't do that. And that's their problem. It has nothing to do with representation. Noting that the seminar aims to explore the many possible applications of diversity within Tolkien's works, his adaptations, and his readership. Now see, this is something I would like to see in Tolkien. Okay? I would like to see news stories talking about the rest of the setting. And I'd like to see old stories, or, well, new stories talking about old parts of the setting, going back into the Silmarillion, or going forward and exploring these areas that Tolkien never really got into. Because those areas are ripe for more modern interpretations if you want to do that, without damaging what has come before. And while respecting what has come before, you could tell the stories of these other cultures. But that's not what they want to do. Representation in Tolkien's works, race, gender, sexuality, disability, class, religion, age, etc. Tolkien's approach to colonialism and post-colonialism. Are you fucking kidding me? Post-colonialism? Do you know when post-colonialism is? The 60s. Do you know when Tolkien was writing? Not the 60s. Here. Let's get specific. Lord of the Rings, 1954. Post-colonialism. See if we can even find a date on that. And a bunch of sociology crap. The colonial era breaks down in the 60s. Let's put it that way. And yes, you could say some of that was happening in the 50s. Tolkien was not writing about post-colonialism. Tolkien was writing... It was published in 54, but he was writing way before then. Look at his notes. He's not writing about post-colonialism. And he's not writing about colonialism either, for that matter. Adaptations of Tolkien works. Diversity and representation in Tolkien academia and readership. Identity within Tolkien's works. Come on. Alterity in Tolkien's work. Let's see what they mean by that. Ah. Being different. Kind of what I figured. Here we go. When did post-colonialism literature start? So, technically began immediately following World War II. But, so the time periods could overlap a little bit. But Tolkien was not writing about post-colonialism or colonialism or identity or different. He did, in fact, address some of that, but that's not what he was writing about. You know, there's clear racism between the elves and the dwarves, and it's depicted as bad. You have to understand when this man was writing and what, not just when he was writing, i.e. the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but when he was raised and what era he really came out of. You know, this man saw the worst periods of the 20th century. And he was trying to write something about coming out of that. And that's very hard to understand now because we're constantly fed this negative stuff. How many times have you seen on social media, oh, this is the worst year ever? And they say it every year. This is not the worst year ever. 2020 wasn't the worst year ever. 2020 wasn't even close. It doesn't even make the top 300 of worst years ever. And yes, to us, it was bad. But compare that to, I don't know, the height of the Black Plague in Europe, where 50% of the population died. He was trying to talk about hope. And hope is what we need. And it's not what we're given. Tolkien Society Seminar is a short academic conference of both researcher-led and non-academic presentations on a specific theme pertaining to Tolkien scholarship. You know, I think we're all tired of this. I think you know what I mean. And it's very frustrating. Sometimes I feel like all we ever have is negative topics to talk about. Because so much is negative in our entertainment. But I want to end on this note. There's a lot negative going on in our entertainment. But it's not all negative. It's not all bad. There are people out there making good things, doing good things. Okay? Keep that in mind. And look for it. So if you like the video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the bell for notifications. And I will see you next time.